My husband pleaded with me not to show up to his law school graduation. Why? I asked. He sneered, I don't want anyone to know you're only a waitress. Coldly he said, I'll tell them you're dead. Never contact me again. I left in tears. Years later on wedding day my phone wouldn't stop ringing. His mother, his bride, everyone asking what happened. The man I poured my heart, soul, and literal blood into supporting for years, looked me dead in the eye and said, don't come to my graduation. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress. But that wasn't even the most twisted part. What came next ripped my world apart in a way I never saw coming. That cold declaration hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks. That's all the time I had before Samuel's law school graduation. For months, I'd been planning, dreaming of that day. I'd already requested the day off from Riverside Diner, picked up the nicest dress I owned, a simple navy blue one, secondhand, but dry cleaned specially for the occasion. I pictured myself in the audience, swelling with pride, watching my husband walk across that stage to get the law degree I'd helped pay for. With tip money. With extra shifts that literally left my feet bleeding. I thought his victory was our victory. But he didn't want me there. Not because of limited seating or some scheduling conflict. No. He didn't want me there because I was just a waitress, and that, apparently, embarrassed him in front of his classmates whose families were all lawyers, judges, people who mattered. Just a waitress, I repeated, the words a bitter taste in my mouth, like poison. Is that what I am to you now? He finally glanced up from his phone. There was no warmth in his eyes, no flicker of recognition for the 3 years we'd been married, or the 6 years I'd spent pouring myself into his dreams while my own stayed locked away in a box under our bed. Haley, be realistic, he said, his voice flat. Everyone there will be from families with money and status. I can't have them meeting you and wondering why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. In that shattering moment, I understood. I had been erased long before he ever spoke those words out loud. But to truly grasp the depth of that betrayal, we have to go back. Back to where this story actually begins. Back to the place where I spent most of my waking hours for 6 years. Back to the life I thought meant something, before Samuel reduced it to an embarrassment he needed to hide. Riverside Diner. Corner of 5th and Morrison. It's the kind of place that always smells like bacon grease and coffee that's been on the burner a little too long. The vinyl booths are cracked, patched with duct tape in mismatched colors. The jukebox? Stuck on the 70s, Eagles and Fleetwood Mac on an endless loop. For 6 years, that diner was my kingdom. I knew every chipped tile, every flickering fluorescent light. I knew which wobbly table needed a napkin shim, which coffee pot poured fastest, and the exact 3-second grind of the ice machine. More than just the mechanics, I knew the people. Every regular customer. Their orders, their habits, their small, human details. Professor Hicks, 7:15 a.m., black coffee, 2 sugars, $2 folded into a tiny tent. The lost university students, camping out for hours in the back booths, nursing cold coffee, debating constitutional law, their textbooks spread like little empires. I'd move between them, a ghost in a name tag, refilling water, clearing plates. They never looked up. Never said thank you. Never learned my name. To them, I was just part of the furniture, as invisible as the chipped tables. But my coworkers? They became my family in ways that truly surprised me. There was Maria, who worked the morning shift for 8 years. She could read a customer the moment they walked in, knew who'd tip well, who'd be a nightmare. She taught me how to handle difficult situations with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, words that sounded pleasant but carried a warning. Devin, washing dishes on weekends, putting himself through community college. He'd scrub pots, his hands raw from hot water, and share his philosophy, every job teaches you something valuable if you pay attention. People who look down on service work have no idea how much skill and endurance it requires. And old Joe, the cook, 30 years at Riverside. He rarely talked, mostly grunts and nods, but he saw everything. If I came in with red eyes, moving slow, he'd slide an extra slice of pie across the counter during my break. No words, no questions. Just that quiet understanding that sometimes, kindness comes in the form of banana cream and silence. This work exhausted me. Not just physically, though my feet ached every single night, a bone-deep pain that Epsom salts couldn't touch. I developed calluses, permanent indentations on my shoulders from heavy trays. My hands smelled like coffee, even after scrubbing them until they were raw. I learned to smile through rudeness, to swallow the anger when customers snapped their fingers or called me sweetheart like it was an insult. But over time, I found dignity in that work. A value the outside world refused to acknowledge, because they measured worth in college degrees and salary brackets, not reliability or honest effort. I showed up, on time, every shift, holidays, weekends. I took pride in making sure coffee cups stayed full, orders came out right, customers left satisfied. Even if they never bothered to learn my name. It was at that diner, 3 years before, that I met Samuel Thornton. He came in late one Tuesday night during finals week, looking utterly exhausted and completely broke. He slumped into a back booth with a stack of law textbooks, counting out change, trying to figure out if he could afford both coffee and food. I watched him, shoulders hunched, separating quarters from dimes, that particular tension of someone doing math they desperately didn't want to finish. So, I brought him coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich. When he tried to pay, I lied, told him it was a mistake order that would just go to waste. I paid for it myself, out of my tip money. Something about him, in that moment, reminded me of my younger brother, who'd struggled through community college. I just couldn't stand to see someone studying so hard, going hungry. Samuel looked up at me with gratitude that felt genuine. And we started talking. He told me about law school, the pressure, the competition, the constant fear he wasn't smart enough or connected enough to make it in a field dominated by wealthy families. I told him about the diner, about the strange satisfaction of making someone's day a little better with good food and friendly service. We talked until my shift ended, and he walked me to the bus stop, even though it was out of his way. Within a month, we were dating. He'd come to the diner during my breaks, we'd sit in that back booth, drinking coffee, talking about everything and nothing. He made me laugh with stories about his eccentric professors. I made him feel grounded, he said, like there was life outside the law school pressure cooker. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse, with Maria and Devin as our witnesses. We couldn't afford a real wedding, not even a nice dinner. But it didn't matter. We were young, we were in love, and we were convinced that our feelings could overcome any obstacle. Those early months of marriage felt like a true partnership. We lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. You could hear every conversation through the thin walls, smell whatever our neighbors were cooking. Our furniture was from thrift stores, our dishes mismatched. Our bed frame? Held together with duct tape and optimism. But it was ours, and we were building it together. Samuel would stay up late studying, while I soaked my aching feet after double shifts. We'd fall asleep tangled on our second-hand couch, too tired for the bedroom, whispering about the future we'd build once he graduated, once his career started. He talked about opening his own practice, defending people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers, using his education to help others, not just accumulate wealth. I believed him. I wanted to believe that we shared the same values, that we both understood what it meant to work hard for something meaningful. I supported him in every way I knew how. When his student loans were delayed, when rent was due, I covered it with tip money I'd been saving for new work shoes. I wore my old ones for another 6 months, even with worn through soles and wet socks in the rain. When he needed expensive textbooks and bar prep materials, I picked up extra shifts, went without new clothes for over a year. My winter coat zipper was broken, but his study materials arrived on time. When exams stressed him, I made sure the apartment stayed quiet, worked evening shifts so he could study uninterrupted. I'd buy his favorite foods, even when money was tight, because I thought small comforts mattered during difficult times. I truly believed I was investing in our future. That his success would be our success, because we were a team. I can see now how profoundly wrong I was. But back then, I worked until my feet literally bled. There were nights I'd come home, peel off my socks, and find burst blisters, my shoes stained pink with diluted blood. I'd clean the wounds, tape them up, and put those same shoes back on the next morning. Because I couldn't afford to miss work. And I couldn't afford new shoes. The shift in how Samuel treated me began so subtly, so gradually, that I honestly convinced myself I was imagining it. Somewhere around his second year of law school, tiny changes started accumulating, building into something much larger, much more damaging. He stopped introducing me as his wife at law school events. We'd arrive at study group parties or networking receptions, and when classmates asked who I was, he'd just say, "This is Haley." No context. No explanation. At first, I thought maybe he just assumed everyone knew we were married. But then, I noticed. He'd immediately change the subject, steering conversations far away from our relationship or how we met. If someone asked what I did, Samuel would jump in before I could even answer, saying something vague about how boring day jobs were compared to legal theory, redirecting them back to law school. He stopped inviting me to study group gatherings at our apartment. He'd schedule them specifically during my dinner shifts at the diner. And when I'd suggest I could request different hours, he'd dismiss it, saying I'd probably be bored listening to them discuss cases anyway. I accepted his explanations. I wanted to believe them, because the alternative, that he was actively hiding me, was too painful to even acknowledge. Then came the day I found out he was lying about my very existence. I discovered it by accident. I'd stopped by the law library one evening to drop off the lunch he'd forgotten. I overheard him talking with two classmates about their weekend plans. One of them asked if he was doing anything with his girlfriend. Samuel, without missing a beat, said he was probably just going to study, that he didn't have time for a relationship with the demands of law school. I stood frozen in the doorway. Invisible. Holding his forgotten lunch, listening to him pretend I didn't exist. I confronted him that night. He swore I'd misunderstood, that he just meant he didn't have time for the kind of relationship other people had, regular date nights, weekend trips. He said I should understand the enormous pressure he was under, that he couldn't worry about how he phrased things in casual conversations. I let it go. I wanted peace more than I wanted truth. But the erasure continued. It intensified. Samuel stopped posting pictures of us together on social media. His Instagram and Facebook pages became carefully curated showcases of him at law school events or studying in coffee shops, a serious, dedicated student with no distractions. When I asked why he never posted our photos anymore, he claimed social media was superficial and he needed to maintain a professional image for future employers. He stopped mentioning me in conversations with professors or at networking events. I knew because sometimes, one of his classmates would wander into Riverside Diner, and when I'd mention being Samuel's wife, they'd look utterly confused, or say they had no idea he was married. Each time, something inside me cracked a little further. I told myself he was just stressed. That law school pressure was making him behave strangely. That things would get better. I made excuses for behavior that needed no excuse, only acknowledgement. But deep down, something cold and certain was growing in my chest. This chilling knowledge that I was becoming invisible in my own marriage. That my husband was systematically erasing me from his life, while I was still living in it. Standing there in our apartment, his cruel words echoing in my ears, I finally understood. The erasure was complete. I wasn't just invisible anymore. According to Samuel, I wasn't supposed to exist at all. The waitress who'd supported him through 3 years of law school, who'd worked until her feet bled so he could study, who'd sacrificed her own dreams for his education. That woman was just an embarrassment he needed to hide from people who mattered. Just a waitress, I whispered again, the words like ashes in my mouth. Samuel stood up, pocketing his phone. "I'm glad you understand," he said, utterly devoid of emotion. "The ceremony is invitation only anyway, so it's not like you were ever really going to be able to attend." It was a lie. I'd seen the graduation info. Family was welcome. But I didn't argue. What was the point? He'd already decided I wasn't family. He'd already decided I wasn't worthy of being seen with him on his big day. I need to get back to studying, Samuel said, walking towards our bedroom. He paused in the doorway, looked back at me, an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he dropped the bomb. Oh, and Haley, I've been telling people you died a few years ago. So if anyone ever asks, just don't contact me. It's cleaner that way. He closed the bedroom door. The click of the lock echoed in the silence. I stood there, frozen, staring at that closed door. The meatloaf I'd made him was growing cold on the coffee table. My entire world was collapsing around me, like a building with a faulty foundation finally giving way to gravity and a terrible, terrible truth. He'd just told me he'd been informing people I was dead. And then he walked away to study, as if he'd simply mentioned a change in his class schedule. My legs felt unsteady. I sank onto the couch, the same couch where we'd spent 3 years together, watching movies, eating takeout, pretending we were building a life. I pressed my palm against the worn fabric, felt nothing but old foam and springs that had lost their tension. I needed to understand. How do you tell people your wife is dead, while she's still making your meals and paying half the rent? I walked to the bedroom door, knocked softly. Nothing. Then harder. Samuel, we need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish, his voice came through the door, muffled but chillingly clear. I have a contracts exam on Monday. I need to study. I opened the door anyway. He sat at the small desk we'd bought secondhand, laptop open, textbooks neatly stacked. He didn't turn around. You cannot just tell me you've been pretending I'm dead and then go study for an exam. He sighed. That exasperated, weary exhale that suggested I was being unreasonable, tiresome. Haley, I already explained this. Everyone at graduation will be from families that matter. Lawyers, judges, business owners. These are people who can help my career. Having them meet you would raise questions about my judgment. My judgment? I repeated, the words foreign in my mouth. What exactly would they question? That you married someone who works hard? Someone who supported you through school? He finally turned in his chair. His expression held no warmth, no recognition of the person I'd been to him for 3 years. They would question why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. Why I chose someone with no education, no prospects, no connections that could benefit me professionally. Each word landed with devastating precision, chosen to inflict maximum damage. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was rehearsed. Considered. Deliberate. I helped pay for your degree, I said, hating how my voice shook. I worked double shifts so you could afford textbooks and bar prep. I covered rent when your loans were delayed. I sacrificed so you could focus on studying. And I appreciate that, Samuel said, in that tone people use when they don't appreciate something at all. But appreciation doesn't change reality. The legal profession is about connections and image. I can't build the career I want while being associated with someone whose greatest accomplishment is remembering how people take their coffee. The casual dismissal of my entire existence. It burned worse than outright hatred would have. Hatred at least acknowledges that someone matters enough to inspire a strong feeling. This was something colder. A calculation. I had served my purpose, and now I was a liability to be eliminated. So, you told people I died, I stated, not questioned. I needed to hear it out loud again, to make it real. Yes. He turned back to his laptop, already done with this conversation. When people asked about family or my personal life, I told them my wife passed away a few years ago in an accident. It was the simplest explanation. Simplest for who? I whispered. For everyone, he clicked something on his screen, his attention already elsewhere. It generated sympathy, which helped in some situations. Explained why no one had met you. And it avoided awkward questions about why I was married to someone inappropriate for my social circle. Inappropriate. The word echoed in my head. 3 years of marriage, reduced to a single adjective that meant I wasn't good enough. Had never been good enough. Would never be good enough, no matter what I sacrificed. When did you start telling people this? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Around the middle of second year, he said, casually, like he was discussing a new study method. That's when networking became more important, and people started asking more personal questions. Second year. That was 18 months ago. For 18 months, Samuel had been walking through the world as a widower, while I served coffee and cleared plates to pay our bills. For 18 months, people had been offering him sympathy for a loss that never happened, while I ached from double shifts so he could study without financial stress. Does anyone know the truth? I asked, desperate. Does anyone in your entire law school world know I exist? He hesitated. That pause told me everything. A few people from first year met you briefly, but most of them transferred or we lost touch. No one who matters knows you are real. No one who matters knows you are real. The sentence was so absurd, I almost laughed. I was standing right here. Breathing, speaking, existing in 3 dimensions. But according to Samuel, I wasn't real because the people who could advance his career didn't know about me. This is insane. I cried. You understand that, right? This is not normal behavior. Normal is relative. Samuel finally closed his laptop, giving me his full attention, which somehow made everything worse. In my world, having the right connections and maintaining the right image is normal. Essential, actually. You come from a different world where those things don't matter. But in my profession, they matter more than almost anything else. More than honesty? More than the person who supported you through school? Yes, he said, without hesitation, without shame. More than those things. I need you to understand something, Haley. I'm going to be successful. I am going to build the kind of career most people only dream about. And I cannot do that while dragging around someone who represents everything I am trying to move beyond. Everything you're trying to move beyond? I echoed, my voice tight. You mean poverty? Working class jobs? The kind of life I live? Yes. Exactly that. He stood up. And I noticed he was taller than I remembered. Or maybe, I had just shrunk. I grew up poor, Haley. I know what it's like to be looked down on, to be dismissed because you don't have the right background. I worked incredibly hard to get into law school. And I am not going to waste that opportunity by staying connected to a life that will hold me back. I am not a life, I said, tears finally stinging my eyes. I am a person. I am your wife. Not for much longer. He walked past me, towards the closet, and pulled out a duffel bag. I think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to focus on studying, and this conversation is not productive. I watched him pack my clothes. He just selected items randomly, shoving them into the bag without care. My favorite sweater, the one with the small hole I'd meant to fix. The jeans I wore on our first date. A dress I'd bought for his law school. A formal he'd asked me not to attend at the last minute. Samuel, we need to talk about this properly. You cannot just erase someone from your life. He zipped the bag and held it out to me. I already have. And I need you to accept that and move on. Don't come to graduation. Don't contact me at school or at work. If anyone ever asks, tell them we were never married. Tell them you have me confused with someone else. Just stay away. What about the apartment? What about our things? My voice was thin. I'll handle the apartment. Take what you need tonight, and I'll have the rest sent wherever you end up. He pulled out his phone, started typing. I'm texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight if you need to. Your sister knows about this? Emma knows we're separating. She doesn't need to know the details. He set the duffel bag at my feet, like he was dismissing a servant. I'm going to continue studying now. Please be gone when I come back out. He walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. I heard the lock click into place. I stood there, in our living room, holding the duffel bag he'd packed, looking around the apartment we'd shared for 3 years. The second-hand couch where we used to fall asleep together. The coffee table where his Thursday night meatloaf now sat cold and congealing. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals while he studied. The bathroom where I'd soaked my bleeding feet. None of it had ever truly been ours. It had been his, and I'd just been borrowing space in it, until he decided I was no longer useful. I picked up my phone and called my sister, Emma. She answered on the second ring. Can you come get me? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need somewhere to stay tonight. Emma didn't ask questions. She just said she'd be there in 20 minutes and told me to wait outside. I grabbed the duffel bag and walked out of the apartment without looking back. The hallway smelled like someone's dinner, garlic and tomatoes. Normal life continuing normally for people whose worlds weren't collapsing. I waited on the front steps, the evening air cool. I hadn't thought to grab a jacket. Cars passed. People walked by with shopping bags, briefcases, heading home to lives that made sense. I sat there, feeling hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me recognizably human, leaving just a shell that looked like Haley but contained only emptiness. Emma pulled up in her old Honda. I climbed into the passenger seat without speaking. She looked at me, at the duffel bag, at my face that must have shown everything. What happened? She asked quietly. He told people I died, I said. And then he told me to leave. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything else. She just drove. I watched the city lights blur past the window, thinking about how you can be alive and dead at the same time. How you can exist and not exist, depending on who's telling the story. At Emma's apartment, she helped me carry my hastily packed belongings inside. Her guest room was small, clean, with too many pillows. She brought me tea I didn't drink, and sat with me while I stared at the wall, trying to comprehend how love could turn into annihilation. Do you want to talk about it? Emma finally asked. I shook my head. Talking required energy I didn't have. Explanations for things I didn't even understand myself. Okay, she said. I'll be in the next room if you need anything. Anything at all. After she left, I lay on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Samuel was studying for his contracts exam. Probably relieved to have me gone. Probably already planning how to maintain his fiction of being a tragic widower. And I was here, officially erased, but inconveniently still breathing. Trying to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who promised to love me had decided I was better off dead. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. Slid under Emma's door in a manila envelope with no return address. I found them on a Tuesday morning, waiting patiently on the doormat. I carried the envelope to Emma's small kitchen table. My hands no longer shook when I opened it. In those 3 weeks, grief had changed. It hardened from something overwhelming into something clearer, more solid. Inside were exactly what I expected: petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences due to lifestyle disparity. That cold, legal phrase reduced 3 years of my life to a bureaucratic checkbox, as if the violence of being erased could be captured in standardized court documents. I signed them that afternoon, with a pen Emma kept in a drawer full of batteries. My signature looked small, unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone I used to know. I mailed them back that same day. The clerk at the post office asked if I wanted tracking. No, I said. There was nothing inside worth tracking. Within a week, I moved into a studio apartment above a used bookstore on Maple Street. The rent was cheaper, the landlord, Mr. Chin, asked no questions. The floors slanted, the radiator clanked, but the windows faced east. Every morning, the sunrise painted the walls in golden pink, making the space feel less like an ending, more like a beginning. I furnished it slowly, with thrift store finds and curb alerts. A faded reading chair, a wobbly wooden table. Mismatched dishes. Plants for the windowsill that I kept alive through sheer determination, as if their survival was connected to my own. Each purchase felt like reclaiming territory, building something that belonged only to me, free from the ghosts of a failed partnership. The Monday after I signed the divorce papers, I walked back into Riverside Diner. It felt both familiar and utterly strange, like I'd left as one person and was returning as someone completely different. Maria was wiping down the counter. She looked up, no pity in her eyes, just solid understanding. "You back for good?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm back." She nodded, handed me a clean apron. "Table 6 needs coffee, couple at the window are ready to order." That was it. No intrusive questions. Just the routine of work, requiring my attention, giving me something concrete to do. I tied the apron around my waist, picked up the coffee pot. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Maria noticed the dark circles under my eyes, but she never pressed for details. She'd just appear with toast or soup, claiming it was extra. If I needed a moment to collect myself in the bathroom, she'd cover my tables without a word. Her kindness was practical, unobtrusive. Devin, scrubbing pots on his weekend shift, would share his philosophies. "Every single dish starts dirty," he'd say. "But if you keep working at it, it comes clean. Nothing stays ruined forever if you put in the work." He understood more about resilience than most people twice his age. Old Joe would start making my favorite comfort foods, unasked. A grilled cheese, his special mac and cheese, pie with extra whipped cream. These people saw me. They valued my work, my presence, in ways that had nothing to do with who I was married to, or what credentials I held. They measured worth differently than Samuel's world did, in reliability, kindness, the small daily acts that kept the diner running. For the first time in years, I felt visible. And that visibility was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Emma checked in regularly, showing up with groceries I hadn't asked for, and wine I definitely needed. She never said, "I told you so," though she had every right. She'd met Samuel only 3 times during our marriage. Once, after a holiday gathering, she'd said, "He looks at people at parties like he's shopping, always scanning for someone more interesting or useful." I'd defended him then, made excuses about networking. But Emma had been right. Now, she just showed up with Thai takeout, and we'd sit at my wobbly table, eating pad Thai, watching terrible reality TV. Her sarcastic commentary about the manufactured drama made me laugh until I cried. Those moments reminded me that not everyone I loved had betrayed me. Some bonds survived, even when others shattered completely. I developed routines that were entirely mine. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Sunday evenings in the bookstore downstairs, Mr. Chin letting me browse for hours. I read novels about other people's problems, memoirs about survival. Slowly, I began to understand that my life wasn't over. Just different than I'd planned. Weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall. I worked my shifts, came home to my small apartment, and built a life that was modest, but honestly mine. I wasn't happy exactly, not yet. But I was stable. And stability, after months of emotional freefall, felt like a monumental achievement. Then came the morning that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. I was on the breakfast shift, moving between tables, refilling coffee, clearing plates, just the familiar rhythm. 2 law students sat in the corner booth, the very same one Samuel used to study in. They were deep in conversation about someone's upcoming wedding. I was only half listening as I approached with the coffee pot. "Did you get your invitation to Samuel Thornton's wedding?" one of them asked. My hand froze mid-pour. Coffee splashed slightly over the rim of the cup. I set the pot down carefully, pretending to wipe the spill, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Yeah, it looks like it's going to be huge," the other student replied. "His fiancée's family is apparently spending a fortune. Her dad is that appellate judge, right? Judge Ashford. Victoria Ashford. Can you imagine landing someone like that?" Samuel really upgraded from that tragic backstory he had going. The whole dead wife thing. They laughed. The sound cut through me like broken glass. I finished wiping the table, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, and walked back to the kitchen. Victoria Ashford. Daughter of an appellate judge. Exactly the kind of pedigree Samuel had been cultivating. The exact opposite of a waitress who embarrassed him with her working-class existence. He hadn't just left me. He had upgraded me. Traded authenticity for advantage. Swapped the woman who supported him through law school for someone whose connections could advance his career. And he was getting married. Celebrating this new partnership while still telling people his first wife had died tragically years ago. I finished my shift, moving through the motions automatically, my mind spinning with this new information. When my shift ended, I walked home slowly, taking the long route through the park, fall leaves crunching under my feet. The air smelled of wood smoke, of approaching winter. Back in my apartment, I sat at my wobbly table, staring at my laptop for a long time before opening it. I hadn't searched for Samuel since the divorce. I'd been trying to move forward, to build something new, not obsess over what I'd lost. But now I needed to see. I needed to know what story he was telling, what version of reality he had constructed around my erasure. I typed his name into the search bar. What I found made something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not jealousy. No. This was a darker form of clarity. It felt almost like purpose taking shape. Samuel's Instagram profile loaded slowly. Images appeared one by one, like evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. The first showed him at a charity gala, in a tailored suit I knew he couldn't have afforded when we were married. Victoria Ashford stood beside him, her hand elegantly on his arm. Both smiling with the easy confidence of people who'd never scrubbed floors or counted coins for groceries. I scrolled down. More photos, each carefully composed. Samuel at a legal conference, associate at Morrison & Wells, one of the most prestigious firms. Samuel and Victoria on a vineyard weekend, wine glasses raised against a professionally photographed sunset. Samuel alone in his new office, law books artfully arranged, his expression thoughtful, accomplished. But it was the captions that made my hands start to shake. Under the gala photo, he'd written about gratitude for second chances and honoring those we have lost by living fully. The comments beneath were full of heart emojis, supportive messages. People wrote about his strength and resilience, how inspiring it was to see him finding happiness again after such devastating loss. Then I clicked an older post, from 6 months ago. A photo of Samuel alone on a beach at sunset, his back to the camera. The caption, 3 years ago today, I lost my best friend and partner. The grief never fully leaves, but I have learned that carrying love forward is the greatest tribute we can offer those who shaped us. She would want me to keep building the life we dreamed about together. Over 100 comments. People sharing their own stories of loss, thanking him for being vulnerable, praising his emotional maturity. One comment, from a partner at his law firm, said his resilience in the face of personal tragedy made him a valuable team member. Something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't just a hot flash of anger. This was something far more dangerous, more calculated. Samuel hadn't just told a few people I was dead. He'd constructed an entire public mythology around my fictional death, complete with anniversary posts and philosophical reflections on grief and growth. My erasure had become performance art. Carefully staged. Widely applauded. I opened a new tab, searched his name and law school. The third result, an article from the Alumni magazine, 4 months ago. Headline, Rising Star, How Personal Tragedy Shaped One Graduate's Approach to Justice. My finger hesitated over the trackpad. I clicked. The article opened with a photo of Samuel in his office. It detailed his remarkable journey, balancing academic excellence with the emotional weight of losing his spouse during his first year. I read it slowly, my pulse accelerating. Samuel described our marriage as a beautiful but brief chapter, a partnership cut short by circumstances he preferred not to detail out of respect for her memory. He claimed the loss taught him about fragility of life and fighting for justice for those who could no longer fight for themselves. Said his late wife had always believed in helping others, and her memory motivated him to pursue civil rights law over more lucrative corporate work. None of it was true. Samuel had never shown interest in civil rights law. He talked constantly about making money, building a practice that would afford him the lifestyle he wanted. And my philosophy about helping others? It extended only to basic human decency. But the interviewer had eaten it up, weaving Samuel's fabricated narrative into a compelling story of perseverance. Quotes from professors, senior partners, praising his character, his resilience, his ability to channel personal tragedy into professional drive. I clicked back to his Instagram, scrolled further. More posts, stretching back over 2 years. Each one meticulously maintaining the fiction. A book about grief. A 5K run. A sunset with a quote about carrying memories forward. The performance was flawless. He'd created an entire digital memorial to a version of me that had never existed. A saintly dead wife whose loss made him more sympathetic, more admirable, more hireable. Every post, dozens of supportive comments. Every public display of grief earned him social capital that translated directly into professional opportunities. Then I found the engagement announcement. 2 months ago, on both his and Victoria's profiles. A photograph on what looked like a yacht. Victoria's left hand prominently displaying an engagement ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The caption spoke of finding love again after loss, of second chances, honoring the past while embracing the future. Victoria's parents commented. Samuel's colleagues. Friends. All woven into this narrative of the tragic widower, who had suffered, healed, and now deserved his happy ending. I clicked on Victoria's profile. Equally curated. Charity events, gallery openings, weekend trips. Beautiful, polished, poised, confident. Her bio mentioned work at a non-profit legal foundation, passion for criminal justice reform. Several glowing posts about Samuel. His strength in the face of tragedy inspired her. Honored to be chosen by someone who understood the preciousness of love because he had lost it once before. She had no idea. Victoria Ashford, daughter of an appellate judge, graduate of an elite university, dedicated to justice and reform, had no idea she was marrying a man who had casually erased his living wife from existence because she embarrassed him. She thought she was getting the grieving widower who had transformed pain into purpose. She had no idea she was getting the man who had told me I was better off dead than sitting in his graduation audience. I closed the laptop. Sat in the darkness of my studio apartment. The radiator clanked. Outside, traffic, distant voices, the normal sounds of a city. My hands had stopped shaking. Replaced by a strange calm, almost detached. Samuel hadn't just told a convenient lie. He had built an entire professional identity on the foundation of my fictional death. Every connection, every job opportunity, every expression of sympathy and admiration, all of it contaminated by this fundamental deception. He had weaponized my erasure, turning it into social capital. The unfairness was staggering. I had given him 3 years of marriage, 3 years of friendship and support. I'd worked until my feet bled so he could study. Sacrificed my own financial security and dreams for his future. And he repaid me by killing me off and using my corpse as a stepping stone to success. But what struck me most wasn't just what he had done to me. It was what he was doing to everyone else. Victoria thought she was marrying someone honest, emotionally mature. His colleagues thought they were elevating someone whose character had been tested by tragedy. His clients would trust him because they believed his personal suffering had made him compassionate. All of them deceived. None of them knew. I stood up, walked to the window. A couple holding hands. A teenager scrolling her phone. An elderly man walking a dog. Normal life. Continuing normally. While I stood there, holding knowledge that could detonate through Samuel's carefully constructed world like a bomb. Some lies are too big to let stand unchallenged. Some betrayals demand a response. Not because revenge would heal anything, but because silence becomes complicity. I thought about Victoria walking down the aisle towards a man she didn't truly know. Samuel's colleagues and clients trusting him based on fiction. All those people who would attend his wedding next weekend, celebrating him without understanding the kind of person they were applauding. This wasn't about making Samuel suffer, though I wouldn't pretend that thought held no appeal. This was about refusing to stay dead. This was about resurrecting the truth, just enough to crack the polished surface he'd spent months building. This was about giving Victoria and everyone else in Samuel's fabricated world a chance to see who he really was, before they invested any more of their trust and respect in someone who didn't deserve it. I opened my laptop again, created a new, anonymous email account. Then I started researching. Wedding venues. Guest lists. Contact information for key people in Samuel's professional and personal life. I worked methodically, taking notes in a notebook I'd bought specifically for this purpose, building a careful architecture of truth. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. But I had a plan. And for the first time since Samuel told me not to come to his graduation, I felt something other than grief or confusion or hollow determination. I felt purpose. Clear. Cold. Certain. Like ice forming on a winter lake. The next morning, the notebook lay open on my kitchen table, filled with names, numbers, details I'd collected through the night. My coffee went cold, but I barely noticed. I was building something precise, a structure of truth that would stand on its own, without me needing to be its visible architect. Victoria's social media had helpfully provided the wedding venue, Ashford Estate, though officially Riverside Manor, an upscale property 30 miles outside the city. Her photos showed manicured gardens, crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that required deposits larger than most people's annual salaries. She tagged it with their wedding date, hashtags like #blessed, #grateful, #forever. Tuesday morning, I cross-referenced social media tags and law firm directories, mapping out Samuel's wedding guest list. Victoria's parents were easy, Judge Richard Ashford and his wife Catherine, polished, prominent. Their social network was like a family tree, each branch leading to more names, more people who believed Samuel's carefully constructed fiction. Samuel's law firm partners were their 5 senior partners, all following him on social media, all commenting on his engagement. I wrote down their names, found their office numbers. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a spreadsheet, contact information for 30 key people. Victoria's family office manager, the wedding coordinator, the receptionist at Morrison & Wells, Samuel's direct supervisor, Victoria's maid of honor. Each name was a point of contact. A place where truth could be planted and allowed to grow. My hands were steady when I made the first call, Thursday morning. The number for Riverside Manor. The wedding coordinator answered with professional cheerfulness. My voice was calm, pleasant. "Hi, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling to follow up on some billing details for the Thornton Ashford wedding this Saturday." There was a brief pause, the kind that signals confusion. "I'm sorry, could you repeat your name?" she asked. "Haley Thornton. Samuel's wife. I just wanted to confirm the payment arrangements are finalized." The pause lengthened. I heard papers shuffling, a mouse clicking. "I'm showing the primary contacts for this event as Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford." "Are you a member of the wedding party?" she asked, cautious. "I'm his wife," I said again, letting the words hang in the air, no explanation needed. "Is there a problem with the account?" "No, no problem at all. I just need to verify some information." "Can you hold for one moment?" I held for 3 minutes, listening to elevator music. When she came back, her voice was carefully professional. "I apologize for the confusion. I'll need to contact the primary account holder to clarify the contact list. Is there a number where you can be reached?" I gave her my cell. Thanked her politely. Hung up. The seed was planted. The coordinator would call Samuel or Victoria, asking about the wife who called about billing. They would have to explain. Address a question that shouldn't exist if Samuel's story about my death was true. The second call was Friday morning, to Morrison and Wells. The receptionist answered with practiced efficiency. "I'd like to speak with Samuel Thornton regarding updates to spouse insurance benefits." "Of course. May I ask who's calling?" "Haley Thornton, his wife." Another pause. Shorter, but laced with uncertainty. "Let me transfer you to his extension." For rings, then voicemail. I left a brief message, same pleasant tone, asking Samuel to call me back about insurance paperwork needing his signature. Then I called back, asked the receptionist to leave him a note too. "Just to confirm," she said, "you said you're his wife?" "Yes, that's correct. Haley Thornton. He should have my number." I could hear her typing. This would sit in his inbox, flagged important, requiring explanation. The receptionist would mention it to colleagues. Small cracks forming. The third call went to Victoria's family office. The number I'd found on Judge Ashford's law clerk's LinkedIn profile. A young woman, Jennifer, answered, bright and efficient. "Ashford Family Office, this is Jennifer." "Hi Jennifer, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling about seating arrangements for the wedding this Saturday. I wanted to confirm where Samuel's wife should be seated during the ceremony." This pause was the longest yet. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. The seating chart shows Samuel Thornton as a single guest, seated with the groom's party. Are you a +1 who was added late?" "No, I'm his wife. We've been married for several years, actually." "Is there a problem with the seating arrangements?" "Let me pull up the guest list." "Can you spell your last name?" I spelled it carefully. The silence that followed told me exactly what she wasn't finding. "I'm not seeing your name on the guest list," Jennifer said, her professionalism cracking into confusion. "And the information we have shows Samuel as unmarried. Are you certain you have the correct wedding?" "Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford this Saturday at Riverside Manor." "That is the wedding I'm asking about." "Yes, that is correct. But I really think there's been some mistake. Let me get your contact information, and I'll have someone from the family reach out to you to clarify." I gave her my number, email, thanked her. Hung up. 3 calls. 3 different sources of confusion. All landing in Samuel's world in the 72 hours before his wedding. Each one requiring explanation. Each one raising questions that had no good answers. I made 2 more calls that afternoon. One to the florist, asking about delivery arrangements, mentioning I was Samuel's wife. One to Victoria's college roommate, leaving a voicemail congratulating her on being in the wedding party, and introducing myself as someone who looked forward to meeting her at the ceremony. Each call was brief. Professional. deliberately confusing. I wasn't lying about who I was. I was simply existing in spaces where Samuel had declared me non-existent. Speaking truth into a narrative built entirely on fiction. These calls would generate conversations. People would mention them to other people. The confusion would spread like ripples, reaching Samuel from multiple directions. I knew from 3 years of marriage that Samuel needed control over every detail of his image. He curated every interaction, every photograph. These small disruptions would create an anxiety he couldn't fully address, because addressing them required either maintaining the lie or admitting the truth. And neither option gave him the control he craved. Saturday morning dawned cool and clear, the kind of October day photographers dream of for outdoor ceremonies. I woke early, dressed carefully in that navy blue dress, the one I'd dry cleaned for Samuel's law school graduation, the one I'd never been allowed to wear. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I wanted to look presentable, unremarkable, like someone who belonged in professional spaces without drawing unnecessary attention. I drove to Riverside Manor, taking the back roads, through neighborhoods where autumn leaves created canopies of gold and red. The estate appeared at the end of a long driveway, a restored Victorian mansion surrounded by manicured gardens. Workers were already setting up, white chairs in perfect rows, floral arrangements around the arbor, a string quartet tuning their instruments. I parked across the street, in a small public lot, positioning my car so I had a clear view of the main entrance, but far enough away to remain unnoticed. I settled into my seat with a bottle of water, a book brought as cover, though I had no intention of reading a single word. Guests began arriving around 11:30. Expensive cars, valet parking, women in elegant dresses, men in tailored suits. Air kisses and greetings that floated across the lawn. I watched Victoria's parents arrive, immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Samuel's law firm partners, looking like they'd stepped out of a recruiting brochure for success. At noon, Victoria herself, in a white limousine, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale pink. Even from across the street, she looked stunning. Perfectly at home in this world of crystal chandeliers and manicured lawns. This was the woman Samuel had chosen to keep alive in his narrative. The one whose existence enhanced, rather than embarrassed, him. Samuel arrived 15 minutes later. Seeing him after 8 months felt stranger than I expected. He looked successful, confident, in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, shaking hands, laughing with groomsmen I didn't recognize. He looked like someone who had never scrubbed floors or counted change for groceries. Someone who had always belonged in spaces like this. I checked my phone. No calls yet. But that would change soon. The wedding was scheduled for 1 o'clock. People were gathering, checking their phones. The coordinator would be finalizing details. The receptionist from Morrison & Wells might be here. Jennifer from Victoria's family office would definitely be here, managing logistics. The confusion I'd planted was about to bloom into something larger, something Samuel could not control or contain. I would watch it unfold from across the street. The dead wife, resurrecting herself, just enough to crack the foundation of the beautiful lie he'd built. I settled deeper into my seat, waiting for the truth to arrive like an uninvited guest at a wedding that should never have happened. At 12:45, guests began taking their seats. The string quartet transitioned from warming up to actual ceremony music, something classical, drifting across the lawn. Samuel appeared, walked toward the altar with his groomsmen. Calm, composed, every inch the successful attorney about to marry into one of the state's most prominent legal families. I watched him take his position beneath the floral arbor, checked his watch, exchanged words with the officiant. Guests settled into white chairs, programs rustling, phones silenced. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. A perfect ceremony for a perfect couple, built on a perfect lie. Then Samuel's phone rang. Even from my position across the street, I saw him stiffen. He pulled it from his jacket pocket, glanced at the screen, an expression of pure irritation. He declined the call, slipped it back, said something to a groomsman, an apology for the interruption. 30 seconds later, it rang again. His frown deepened. He pulled out the phone, stared longer, and I watched his jaw tighten. That was his tell. When something was going wrong, and he was fighting for control. He declined it again. But his composure had developed a crack. The phone rang a third time before he could put it away. Samuel stepped back from the altar, held up a finger to the officiant, asking for a moment. He answered the call, pressing the phone to his ear, his free hand going to his hip. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could read his body language, shoulders hunched, a sharp gesture with his hand, growing tension. Whatever explanation he was trying to give was clearly not satisfying the person on the other end. Guests in the front rows began turning, whispering. The officiant looked uncertain. One of the groomsmen approached Samuel, said something, but Samuel waved him away, still on the phone. Then I saw Victoria's mother stand up from her front row seat. Catherine Ashford, phone pressed to her ear, her expression shifting from composed matriarch to someone dealing with an unexpected crisis. She walked quickly towards the altar, her elegant dress not quite suited for the pace. She reached Samuel just as he ended his call, and immediately began speaking to him, gesturing at her own phone. I watched Samuel shake his head, try to explain, but Catherine's expression was transforming from confused to outright suspicious. She kept pointing at her phone, her voice carrying across the lawn in fragments I couldn't make out, but her tone unmistakably demanded answers. Other guests were checking their phones now. A ripple effect. Devices pulled out, screens looked at, confused glances. The wedding coordinator appeared from behind the manor, practically running across the lawn, tablet clutched in both hands. She reached Samuel and Catherine, trying to show them something on her screen, her mouth moving rapidly, trying to explain a situation that made no sense. One of Samuel's law firm partners, Richard Morrison, stood up. He strode to the front, the deliberate pace of someone used to taking charge in a crisis. When he reached the growing cluster, he pulled out his own phone, showed Samuel something on the screen. Samuel's face had gone from irritated to genuinely panicked. His hand ran through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. He was talking rapidly, gesturing with both hands, trying to explain something to multiple people at once. But whatever he was saying wasn't resolving the confusion. More people kept approaching, phones in hand, questions in their eyes. The string quartet had stopped playing. The sudden silence made the chaos at the altar even more noticeable. Guests were standing, craning their necks, whispering speculation that grew louder. Then I saw Victoria. She emerged from the manor in her wedding dress, surrounded by bridesmaids. She was supposed to wait for her cue. But something had gone very wrong. She took 3 steps onto the lawn before she seemed to register the ceremony hadn't started. That something was very wrong at the altar, where her groom should have been waiting calmly. Victoria gathered her dress and walked quickly towards the cluster, her face shifting from bridal joy to confusion, then to something harder. As she got closer, I watched her reach Samuel, grab his arm, pull him slightly away. They stood face to face. Even from across the street, I could feel the intensity of that conversation. Samuel tried to calm her, his hands making placating gestures. But Victoria wasn't having it. She stepped back from him, one hand going to her mouth in shock. Her mother moved to her side immediately. Now Samuel was surrounded by the 2 most important women in his fabricated life, both clearly demanding answers he couldn't provide without destroying everything. Judge Ashford stood up from his seat, his expression grave. He approached the group with the measured pace of someone who knew how to project authority in chaos. He said something brief to Samuel, and I watched Samuel's face drain of color. More phones rang. More messages checked. The wedding coordinator frantically typed on her tablet, trying to reach vendors. Samuel's law firm partners clustered together, speaking among themselves, glancing at the altar with expressions ranging from concern to professionally suspicious. Victoria's hand dropped from her mouth. She stared at Samuel with an expression I recognized all too well. The look of someone watching a person they thought they knew transform into a stranger. Her mother had an arm around her, but Victoria seemed barely aware. I checked my phone. 10 minutes had passed since the ceremony was supposed to start. 10 minutes of Samuel's carefully constructed world collapsing under the weight of simple truth. The dead wife calling about billing. The dead wife inquiring about insurance benefits. The dead wife asking about seating arrangements. Each call a small bomb detonating in his fiction, creating confusion that multiplied, spread, until it could no longer be contained or explained away. Samuel pulled out his phone again, appeared to be making a call himself. Probably trying to reach me, trying to stop what was already in motion. But my phone had been off for hours. There was nothing he could say that would put this back together. Judge Ashford was speaking to the officiant now. I could read the body language. The ceremony was delayed indefinitely. The judge turned to address the guests, his voice carrying, trained to command a courtroom. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the reaction, guests standing, confused conversations erupting, people gathering belongings or moving towards the manor entrance. Victoria's bridesmaids surrounded her, a protective cluster. I watched her turn away from Samuel, walk back towards the manor with her mother in attendance, forming a barrier between her and the man she'd been about to marry. Samuel tried to follow, but Judge Ashford put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. The two men stood there, having what looked like a very serious conversation, while the wedding dissolved around them. I had seen enough. The truth had done its work, creating exactly the kind of chaos that couldn't be smoothed over with explanations or excuses. Samuel would have to choose, admit he'd lied about my death, or construct even more elaborate lies to cover the first ones. Either choice would cost him something significant. His credibility. His relationship with Victoria. His standing at the law firm that had elevated him based on a character assessment built on fiction. I started my car, pulled slowly out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, the scene continued to unfold, guests streaming towards cars, clustering in confused groups, the wedding coordinator standing alone by the arbor, staring at her tablet like it might hold answers. Samuel, still talking with Judge Ashford, his gestures growing more desperate. The ghost he had tried to create had spoken, from beyond the grave he dug. And the message was devastatingly simple: I'm still here. I exist. And lies, no matter how carefully constructed or widely believed, eventually collide with truth in ways that cannot be managed or controlled. I drove back towards the city, slowly, taking the scenic route. Neighborhoods where families were having normal Saturday afternoons. Kids playing. People washing cars. Couples walking dogs. Regular life, continuing for people whose worlds hadn't just collapsed under the weight of fundamental deception. My phone stayed off in my purse. I didn't need to hear Samuel's explanations. I didn't need to witness the aftermath directly. I had done what I came to do. Which wasn't to destroy him, but simply to stop being dead. To exist loudly enough, in the right spaces at the right time, that his fiction could no longer hold. The revenge I needed wasn't violence or dramatic confrontation. It was just this, the truth, deployed precisely, allowed to spread through his world like cracks in ice. What happened next wasn't my concern. I had served my final notice. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his ambition had proven capable of serving him one last thing he could not send back or ignore. I was alive. Inconvenient. Unmarketable. Completely real. And that, finally, was enough. I drove home through the Saturday afternoon traffic, the autumn sun filtering through the trees. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my breathing calm. There was no rush of adrenaline, no wild triumph. Just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a profound book. I walked up the narrow stairs to my studio apartment. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, the reading chair by the window, the plants on the sill catching the afternoon light, the small table with its folded napkin. My space. My sanctuary. Untouched by the chaos I'd created just 30 miles away. I made tea, sat by the window, watching the street below. Normal life continued. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small earthquake I'd triggered in Samuel Thornton's reality. My phone stayed off all weekend. I didn't need to know what happened after I drove away. I didn't need Samuel's explanations or excuses. The truth had been deployed. And truth has its own momentum once released. Sunday, I worked my regular shift at Riverside Diner. Maria, with that 6-year wisdom, raised an eyebrow. "You look different," she said, as we set up the coffee station. "Something happened?" "I took care of something I needed to handle," I replied, filling the industrial coffee maker. "That's all." She just nodded, understanding, like good friends do. We worked in comfortable rhythm, refilling cups, clearing plates. Monday morning, I finally turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls from Samuel. A dozen texts, from confused to angry to pleading. 3 voicemails I deleted without listening. I blocked his number. In the architecture of my own life, nothing had changed, except the weight I no longer carried. Tuesday afternoon, Emma called. "So, I heard some interesting gossip," she said without preamble. "About a certain wedding that apparently went sideways this weekend." I just kept organizing cans of tomato sauce. Apparently, it was delayed by almost half an hour because the groom was getting calls and messages about his dead wife, who turned out to be not so dead after all. Emma said Victoria was in tears. The judge looked ready to call it off. "Sounds complicated," I offered. The ceremony eventually went forward, but Jennifer said the reception was tense. Like everyone was pretending everything was fine, while clearly nothing was fine. And now? People are talking. Law firms love gossip, and a story about someone faking a spouse's death for sympathy? That spreads. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said, "but I'm not really interested in following up on any of it. What happens in Samuel's world isn't my concern anymore." Emma agreed. "Whatever you did, it worked. People are asking questions he can't answer well." Samuel's world was cracking, just as I knew it would, once truth entered the foundation. What happened next was between him and the people he had deceived. The weeks that followed settled into the familiar patterns of my rebuilt life: morning shifts, afternoon walks, evenings in my apartment, reading or cooking. I'd found a rhythm that sustained me, sufficient and satisfying. A few months later, Emma forwarded a screenshot. Samuel and Victoria at their reception, smiling for the camera. But even through the filter, something looked wrong. Smiles too tight. Victoria's eyes held no warmth. Samuel's hand on her waist looked like obligation. The caption, from one of Victoria's cousins, asked a question that had generated significant discussion: why would someone lie about a spouse dying? What does that say about their character and integrity? The comments were a debate. Some defended him, others questioned his honesty. A few pointed out the multiple sources of calls from his supposedly dead wife. I saved the screenshot. The mythology Samuel had built was developing cracks. Sunlight was getting into the fissures. What grew in those cracks was no longer my concern. I had simply planted truth in soil cultivated with lies. Nature would take its course. My own life, though, brought unexpected changes. In February, Frank offered me assistant manager. Better pay, weekends off. "You've earned this," he said. "You show up, you work hard, you treat people with respect. That matters more than fancy credentials." Maria organized a small celebration. Joe grumbled about the cake while eating 2 pieces. Devin wrote a card everyone signed. These people had become my family, seeing me for who I actually was. This promotion felt more meaningful than any of Samuel's polished achievements, built on reality, not fiction. 6 months after the non-wedding, Emma had more updates. Victoria's parents had investigated, found out the truth about me. The marriage went forward, but it was strained. Victoria felt fundamentally betrayed. Morrison and Wells had serious conversations about Samuel's judgment. He wasn't fired, but no longer fast-tracked. His sympathetic widower narrative was replaced by questions about integrity. "Does that feel satisfying?" Emma asked. "It feels complete," I said. "I didn't do this to punish him. I did it to stop being dead. What happens to him now is between him and the people he deceived. I'm just living my life." I walked home through streets where spring was asserting itself. My studio apartment, entirely, authentically mine. The truth had done its work. Samuel's facade had cracks that would never fully repair. And I had stopped being the ghost he tried to create. Reclaiming my existence by refusing to stay buried. That was enough. That was everything. Then, late October, a year after Samuel's cruel decree. A calendar notification, anniversary. I'd never deleted it. 6 years since we'd stood in that courthouse. I stared at it, dismissed it. But the date lingered, a marker of how far I'd come. After work, I did something I'd never done. I made a reservation at Marcellus, an Italian restaurant I'd always walked past, too expensive. But I'd received my first assistant manager paycheck. This anniversary deserved acknowledgement. A celebration of what I'd survived and rebuilt. The hostess seated me by the window. The restaurant, elegant, softly lit. I felt briefly self-conscious, sitting alone at a table for couples. But I pushed it aside. This evening was mine, earned through resilience. I ordered wine that cost more per glass than Samuel and I used to spend on entire bottles. The first sip was rich, complex. What quality tasted like when you could finally afford it through your own honest work. The server brought the chef's special pasta. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling completely whole in a way I'd never felt even during our marriage. No one across from me, making dismissive comments. No one measuring my worth. Just me, alone, present in my own life. I watched city lights come on. Couples walking, friends laughing, a woman walking alone with confident strides. All living their own stories. I thought about Samuel, probably dining with Victoria in an equally nice restaurant. I wondered if he remembered this anniversary. If Victoria knew. But those thoughts came without the sharp edge of pain they once carried. Samuel's life was his own now, contaminated by lies he'd have to manage indefinitely. His difficulties were consequences of his own choices. I had no obligation to care. Dessert arrived, a masterpiece of chocolate and cream. I savored it, finishing my wine, grateful for this moment, this meal, this life I'd built from ruins. Understanding settled over me. Being erased from someone's story doesn't mean you cease to exist. It means you exist outside their narrative, free to write your own truth. Samuel tried to make me invisible. But erasure only works if you cooperate. I refused. Not through dramatic confrontation, but by existing loudly enough, at the right time, to crack his foundation of lies. The waitress he dismissed had served him one final order he couldn't send back. Truth. Delivered with precision. I paid the check, left a generous tip. As I gathered my coat, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. Not the broken woman from Emma's guest room. Not the shrinking self from 3 years ago. This woman was Haley Brennan, assistant manager, survivor of betrayal, who'd learned that being dismissed isn't the same as being dismissible. I had scars, but also clarity about my worth. I walked home through streets smelling of autumn leaves. Climbed the stairs to my apartment, furnished with pieces I'd chosen, I'd paid for. The reading chair where I spent Sunday evenings with books from the shop downstairs. The small table with its folded napkin that held my coffee every morning. The plants on the windowsill that I had kept alive through consistent care and attention. Everything in this apartment carried meaning rather than serving as props in someone else's curated life. This wasn't performance. This was just living. Honest. Modest. Completely real. It wasn't glamorous by Samuel's standards, but it was solid in ways fiction could never be. I made tea, sat in my reading chair by the window. Samuel tried to write me out of his story. To erase me so completely that I became nothing more than a tragic footnote in his narrative of perseverance and success. But stories have a way of asserting their own logic, demanding internal consistency, punishing those who falsify fundamental facts. His story would always be contaminated by the lie at its center. The dead wife who turned out to be alive, and capable of disrupting his carefully planned wedding with nothing more than truth delivered precisely. My story was different. It was clean. Built on survival and the quiet power of continuing to exist, despite someone else's determination to erase me. It was not a story people would tell at networking events or use to generate sympathy. It was just mine. Honest. Hard-won. Sufficient. I raised my teacup toward my reflection in the dark window. A small toast to the woman I had become. Not the ghost Samuel tried to create, but someone solid, present, and whole. Someone who had learned that the best revenge is not destruction or punishment, but simply refusing to disappear. Simply continuing to exist with dignity and honesty while the lies collapse under their own weight. The evening stretched ahead with no demands on my time or attention. I could read or cook or simply sit in this chair, watching the city lights and feeling grateful for this ordinary, extraordinary life. Tomorrow, I'd work my shift at the diner. I'd pour coffee in clear plates and exchange easy conversation with people who valued my presence and my contributions. I'd come home to this apartment and these routines and this quiet satisfaction that came from building something real. That was enough. That was everything. The ghost had learned to live again, not by haunting the person who tried to kill her off, but by claiming her own space in the world and refusing to be anything other than fully, completely, inconveniently alive. I finished my tea and set the cup down gently on the small table. Outside my window, the city continued its evening rhythms. And inside this modest apartment above a used bookstore, I sat in my reading chair, feeling absolutely complete, defined not by someone else's shame or limited by someone else's ambitions, but by my own resilience and my own refusal to stay buried in a grave dug with lies. The anniversary had passed. The ghost had lived. And that, finally, was the entire story. If this story of truth finally serving justice had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was watching Samuel's phone ring at the altar, his perfect facade crumbling in real time. What was your favorite moment? Or what would you have done in my place? Tell me what you think, I really want to know. And don't miss more compelling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an